Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst. I'll be chairing the panel this afternoon. To my left is Mr. Brent McIntyre, and to my far left is Ms. Laurie Davidson. The assessor this afternoon is Ms. Lindsay Wareham, and our recording secretary is Ms. Michelle Neepin. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. May I ask everybody to please silence their phones? Thank you.
So this one actually. So Rocky's representing.
Right, he's next door.
So we'll leave that one for now.
Okay, so we'll start with this one. I don't know.
I'm not sure if he's here or not.
Okay, I'll ask and find out. Okay, the first matter we'll be dealing with this afternoon is 2165 Henderson Highway.
I have introduced myself tonight.
Yes.
Mr. Hackle.
Are you here for 2165 Henderson Highway?
Yes. Not Henderson.
Yes, that's the first one on the docket.
No.
Okay, nobody's here on that matter? Okay, so the next one is 4055 Portage Ave. So please come forward and be sworn in. Thank you.
Can you state your full name, please?
Antoine Hackle.
You swear that the evidence or the this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Can you state your full name, please? Lindsay Wareham. Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you?
Okay, so this one is being appealed on classification of property. You'll be proceeding first, Ben?
Yes. You're going to be marking documents that will be fairly lengthy brief.
Yes.
I'd like to mark. Having received the assessor's brief, I've got a couple of pages of rebuttal information.
by. Give me 1 minute, please. Oops.
I'm not sure what in my brief this is rebuttal. Yes, I'm looking at it as well, and I'm not sure that it's actually rebuttal to. It just looks like additional information. I'm not sure what in my brief this actually would be refuting, so I'm not sure I agree to it being handed out.
Okay, we cannot accept new evidence at this hearing. We can only accept rebuttal to the assessor's
I
evidence.
understand
And
that,
if she
but
does not-
without me explaining it, I can't put it in context, so I guess we can keep it for now, but I'd like to have a chance to explain why I believe it's
We'll
rebuttal.
hold on to it for now and then
Yep.
wait for her. So you'll be appealing classification of property only, so please proceed. Now.
To start the presentation, actually, I don't think it's included in my brief, but it is in the assessor's brief at page 15.
That has not been submitted to evidence.
It's just a statutory section, it's not really evidence. I mean, I didn't make extra copies, I could have done that in the brief. It's just to explain the classification issue. I can explain it
Just
verbally.
explain it verbally,
Okay.
please.
So, this property is classified as other right now. And it should be classified as institutional under section 8B of the municipal assessment regulation. It would just be more convenient to actually look at the actual wording, but at page 15 if you want to make a note, because I bet you it's going to be 8B reads as follows. The class of property known as institutional property consists of the following. B, land and buildings, any portion of land and buildings that are exempt under subsection 23(1) of the Municipal Assessment Act from taxation for school purposes. So the property is currently classified as other, which is a type of property that is not included in sections 3 to 9 and section 8. So there's a conflict. It can't be other and it can't be institutional at the same time. Other excludes section 8 as classified as other. So the evidence today focuses specifically on whether this property is school tax exempt, because that's the test under 8B. The test under 8B, to read again, land and buildings or any portion of land and buildings that are exempt under subsection 23(1) of the Municipal Assessment Act from taxation for school purposes. So to be able to come to that classification decision, you necessarily have to make a decision that the property is school tax exempt. That's what allows you to classify it as institutional property. Okay? That brings me to my brief. So this has been marked now, as I understand it. I don't intend to go through the entire brief, just to provide a little bit of background. This property, as your listing will show, is owned by Red River X. Red River X is an agricultural society that is exempt from school taxes under section 23(1). Specifically, if you go to tab 1 of our brief, second page in, so there's a title page, second page in, at the bottom, which should be exemption from school taxes, 23(1). So I'm tying in, recall, the classification. You can't make a decision on whether it's institutional or not without first deciding whether it's school tax exempt, because that's what makes it institutional property. 23(1)(c).
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm having an issue with this because we're only dealing with classification of property, not liability to taxation, and so we can't deal with the liability to taxation. Have you actually made an application at the city for liability to taxation? Because it should have been done at that level.
I understand your point, and my position on that, and that's why I started with section 8B, is that when you make a decision that this is classified as institutional, you're actually deciding both issues. You have to decide, to be able to make a decision, that that condition of the school tax exempt, otherwise I can't convince you that it's classified as institutional, right? The forms actually, and that's part of my rebuttal. The forms are just forms. They're actually, over the years of my experience, they've been modified over time.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Hucko. Unfortunately, though, because at this hearing you've only requested us to deal with the classification of property, we can't actually deal with the liability. And so we can't deal with that at this hearing. If you had requested both, then we could, but you didn't, so we can't deal with that at this hearing. So you're asking us to do something that we cannot do.
Well,
I understand what you're saying, and I understand how that act works, but our hands are tied from an administrative perspective that has nothing to do with anything that I can do at this point.
And that's where this additional document, because that issue only came to light when I spoke to the assessor. My view was that checking off the classification box, because both the assessment department and us knew the whole issue was exemption from the school tax under section 23, which qualifies it as institutional, that issue was necessarily going to be decided as soon as you put classification into issue. That was my understanding. Now, the assessor has advised otherwise and said that they want the box liability of taxation ticked off. And this material deals with that position and your question, Madam Chair, on that issue. The sections that are in this piece of legislation, the very first page that I wanted to introduce, deals with your question, that the panel can make an order with respect to anything that is in issue. And the issue to be decided is whether or not it qualifies under 8B.
You know what, I'm going to take a 5-minute recess and I'm going to confer with my fellow panel members.
So I have additional information on that issue, but where I would be going with that is that a form prepared by the city doesn't override your authority under the legislation and under this particular section. It says if something's an issue, you have a right to make a decision on it. it doesn't tie it to a particular form. And that's, I haven't completed that presentation yet, but that's what I'd like to have a chance to present.
Okay, well, let me discuss this with my fellow panel members, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Okay, and we exit the room.
Yes, please. I'll call this meeting back to order. We have discussed the matter and reviewed the Municipal Assessment Act, and we can hear the matter on the application for classification of property only, but we cannot hear any evidence regarding liability on this matter.
I would ask for further clarification from this panel then, because the classification tests for institutional property, and I'm going to read it into the record again, is that land and buildings are exempt under section 23 sub 1 of the Municipal Assessment Act from taxation for school purposes. If I can't discuss that, I can't discuss classification because that's the test. So if I'm being directed by this board not to discuss the test and to not discuss the exemption from taxation test that is specific to that classification, I guess there's no use continuing, because that's the only thing that I can discuss to convince you yes or no that it's institutional property. So if I can't discuss the test, there's no use in continuing. I'll have filed my brief, and I would ask also, although you're not accepting it, you could put it as an exhibit for identification, the document which actually sets out the relevant provisions of the Municipal Assessment Act on what you can decide and cannot decide. I ask, if you don't want to put an official document, I'd still ask that it be received, because it is a section that you just referred to, and it is in the document that I wanted to submit to this panel. So I have one measure of clarification, just to confirm, yes, Mr. Echo, you are not entitled to discuss anything under 8B, because that talks about school tax. And the other request is that you accept this document, which actually has the sections which I say entitle you to deal with the issue. And then we can end the hearing. I don't want to prolong it to cause issues.
Mr. Hucko, I'm not telling you that you cannot proceed with your matter. I'm just advising you that, unfortunately, due to the, I guess, information you had provided when you made your application to the board, you had made an application for classification of property only. So unfortunately, our hands are tied to administrative issues, and that is the only issue we can hear this afternoon. So if you want to proceed, you're welcome to proceed on classification only, but as I said, we cannot hear evidence on the liability to taxation issue.
Still confused, because the test, I read it in a couple times, liability with taxation. I can't discuss classification without discussing that test. So if you're, that's my understanding, but then I'm allowed to talk about test in B, or am I not allowed to talk about test in B?
Mr. Hucko, you heard our decision on this issue of classification, and that we are unable to hear any evidence on liability.
Okay. Can I also then have a decision on whether I'm asking that this rebuttal document, the first page of which deals with this board's jurisdiction?
Unfortunately, we cannot accept that because it is it's an introduction of new evidence at the hearing.
Okay. So I've made the request. My explanation is that law is not evidence. In legal proceedings, law is legal argument. Evidence is the story and the facts that are applied to the law. So I guess I made the request, and it will be on the record, that I be allowed to put the law in front of this board. And the ruling is that the law cannot go in front of the board.
I disagree with your interpretation of the law, but
that document can't be put in front of the board, is that what you're saying?
yes, because the filing date was missed for new evidence. There was a date, and it was not filed prior to that date.
It was filed.
And you were bringing it today.
But I attempted to file this material, a good chunk of it, on December 3, which was immediately after we received the assessor's brief. I did it by email, and then on December 4, I delivered material.
And was that after the exchange date?
It was immediately after, and that's why it was rebuttal, because I didn't get, it wasn't an exchange. We got the assessor's brief from the board. I had actually given my brief 20 days ahead of the actual sitting today, and we were only able to get the assessor's brief after it had been filed. So that was, it was filed on Friday, I believe, and on the Monday, or on the Tuesday, which was December 3, because I was in the file on December 2. On Tuesday, December 3, is when I spoke to the assessor, and our staff had asked and obtained from the Board of Revision the assessor's brief. And we pulled my file, but
Well, Mr. Hucko, our hands are tied because unfortunately we have nothing to do with those dates, and we have to abide by the rules of the board.
what date should it have been filed? I mean, if I don't have the brief, I'm not too sure how I can even respond to it.
The issue was that it was not rebuttal to the assessor's brief. It was new evidence that was being introduced. That was the issue.
So I've marked the brief. I will, just for the record, and I'm not doing this to try and defend the board at all, just take about 5 minutes then to
Absolutely.
just give an introduction to this
Go ahead.
material and indicate that we adopt it. I'm going to read in pages 1 and 2 and part of up to 4. The first paragraph, as you see, references Section 23(1)(c) of the Municipal Act, indicating that the board had looked into the same issue in 2019, and had classifying dairy farmers as an agricultural society, entitling it to a school tax exemption under 23(1)(c). That's the test under 8B that I've given you. And it decided that the dairy farmers qualified for a school tax exemption. No facts have changed since that last hearing earlier this year. The assessor appealed this decision of the Board of Revision to the Queen's Bench, and we had submitted at page 2 that the board should reconfirm the 2019 assessment decision in the 2020 assessment with respect to the issue of school tax exemption. If the assessor wishes, it can also add this board's 2020 assessment decision to the court case. And we say it's only as a measure of precaution that we provide this extensive evidence and legal brief on the issue of the school tax exemption, which is that test for the classification. So dairy farmers occupies this particular property, as I said, initially Red River X, school tax exempt. And there's this board decision, which is been marked as part of this brief, where that's at tab D as in Donald. Where the previous panel in January of this year agreed that it should be school tax exempt. The hearing in front of the Court of Queen's Bench has not yet been overturned the previous board decision. So we provided all the details as to why this board should again decide that the test in 8B has been complied with. Section 23, 1 is at tab 1 of our brief. So 23(1)(c) as in Charlie. At the bottom is owned by an incorporated agricultural or horticultural society. We've provided evidence that it's owned, and when it's leased, there's sections that allow it. It should be assessed in lessee's situation. So that would satisfy the test owned. We've provided evidence that it's incorporated. It's in the brief. We've provided evidence that it's agricultural. That's properly self-evidence. It's dairy, run by dairy farmers. All that evidence is in the brief, all the details. And we're adopting it on behalf of our client in this brief. And we've also provided evidence based on the definition of society that it fits the definition of a society, which is a grouping of people together for a common interest. And if you look at that definition of society, it is tab 15. The second one, voluntary association of individuals with common ends, organized group working together for periodically meeting because of common interests, beliefs, or profession. So there is a lot of detail in this brief about these dairy farmers having gathered together to create this incorporated company, a not-for-profit company, for the common interests and beliefs of them, and that they do the same thing as other agricultural societies, they go to fairs, etc. And essentially for the same reasons that we had submitted to the board about 10 months ago, back in January. We say that it meets the test set out in that classification section 8B as being exempt under Section 23(1) of the Municipal Assessment Act, in particular, as I said, subsection C is in Charlie. And this issue of under 8B of school tax exemption was brought up, we say, through the classification section and also in our brief. There's no surprise to anybody that this was the issue that was being discussed and dealt with. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer.
Thank you very much. This is where I'm due questions for the applicants.
I think just one. You mentioned that this had been appealed previously. This property had previously been appealed at the Board of Revision?
Correct.
Correct. Was only classification appealed at that point, or were the 3 points of appeal appealed?
The document that's put in front, so the boxes that were checked is at tab C. The boxes that were checked were amount of assessed value, classification of property and liability and taxation. If you go to the next page, which is the decision of the Board of Revision, for some reason, institutional was not put in to match the school tax exemption on the decision part, but the school tax exemption was put in.
So you would agree that previously the boxes were checked to actually make the discussion and the argument with respect to classification and liability together, correct?
There's two parts to that question. I can answer yes, the document had check marks off, but the second part of the question related to being able to argue the issue. And the issue of school tax exemption is necessarily implied and has to be made. That decision on that issue has to be made in order to classify as institutional. You can't make that decision without making. So that's where I disagree with you, Madam Assessor, because Section 54 of the Municipal Assessment Act says that if something is put into issue, this board has a right to make a decision on it. And by appealing the classification, which requires the school exemption issue to be decided, the issue of school tax exemption is put in front of this board according to the legislation. A form does not override the statute. The forms are not prescribed by the statute. They're not approved by the statute. The statute says that after hearing an application, this board can make a change with respect to any matter that was put into issue, and school tax exemption was put into issue by checking off the box in the previous form and in the current form.
Those are my questions, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davidson. I have no questions. Mr. McIntyre?
I have several. Why didn't you check it off on this application?
On this application,
The current one that's before the board.
it was done that way because it included both issues. If the
What's the difference between that and appealing the supplementary assessment?
I understand your point. The forms that the Board of Revision used to have, not the current one, actually had a box where you could put further explanation. And I agree with you that it may have caused some confusion to parties who weren't aware of what was an issue. But there's as soon as the box classification is ticked off, and everybody knows that 8B is an issue, and that's school tax, it's belts and suspenders to also tack off the other box because the issue is already an issue. I get your point, though.
And I bring
Mr.
your attention to section 42(1) of the Municipal Assessment Act, which clearly says a bunch of people can make application for revision with respect to the following matters: liability, amount of assessed value, classification of the property, and refusal under section 13(2). So the application requirements are further detailed in section 43(1). So in fact, the board is operating under the MAA as far as the application is concerned. Is it not?
The application form itself is, see, this is where I say that the form, if we look at 43(1), which you referenced, Mr. McIntyre, it says set out the matters referred to in subsection 42(1) are at issue. And what does it say?
The grounds
for each of those matters. Your form actually doesn't allow for the grounds.
But it doesn't preclude you from attaching a letter to the application saying these are the grounds. Does it?
It doesn't preclude, it wouldn't have precluded a letter, but it's not provided for. It used to have a box
Well, I guess
where you could put that.
we can't consider what used to be, but what is here for today.
So the keywords that you referenced in 43(1)C, Mr. McIntyre, says that are at issue. And when you talk about something that's at issue, it's something that has to be decided. And under 8B, something that has to be decided and is at issue, otherwise I can't talk about that exemption, is the school tax exemption.
Which is covered under liability, right? Would you not agree that there's a correlation between section 8B and liability?
Well, the test under 8B is, so to win the classification argument, the only way I can do that, if no other argument, it's not discussing am I farming the land or not. But it would be farmland. That's not discussing any other type of classification tests. This is kind of a unique situation in that the test for classification is the only issue is the school tax exemption. There's no other issue. So it's unique in that way. And I agree for other types of applications, I wouldn't even be making this submission to Member McIntyre. But this is a specific case where you cannot decide classification without deciding school tax liability. So as soon as you check off the box classification, in my respectful view, because of the specific section, you necessarily, because it's the only thing you can talk about, have indicated that you want to talk about the school tax exemption issue under section 23. There's nothing else to talk about. So I understand your point. You know, if I go to the assessor's brief and other tests, if I had to discuss 8D, for example, a building or portion of a building that's used for a nursing home or a personal care home in land that's contiguous, that's not school tax exemption. I wouldn't have to discuss school tax exemption. That wouldn't be an issue. But B, the only thing that's an issue is the school tax exemption. And the test in the legislation, as you correctly said, is that we had to identify an issue. And that issue is school tax exemption. So that's why, maybe inelegantly explaining that I agree with you if it was other items under classification. Other items, this is probably, I haven't reviewed the classification regulation, but I think this is the only one that specifically ties it to section 23.1, which is the one we were arguing about. It's the only kind of classification that specifically says the only way you can decide it's institutional property is if you decide the issue of school tax. So that's why I'm trying to answer your question, that in checking off that box necessarily requires that issue to be decided, and the section that you pointed out to me says that you put the issue into question, and the issue into question is whether it's school tax exemption. And that gets repeated again. So both sections that you referenced, 43.1 was in my rebuttal document that you referenced, and it's also referenced again in section 54 on the authority of this board to make orders. If something's put into issue, it has the authority to make an order on something that's put into issue. It doesn't tie it into what box has been checked. I don't know if I'm able to explain it. You may not agree with my explanation.
I think that's fine, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. You actually covered my question, so
Sorry.
that's okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Book, are you presenting?
I think our position is very clear. The rules are set forward as such that an application for appeal needs to be made within a certain amount of time. And if the only issue at hand was liability, then that would be the first and foremost box to check off is liability. And knowing that you have to meet when you are exempt under section 23.1C, that you also have to change your classification, that automatically leads one to check off that classification box because you require both of those to obtain the classification and liability status. So our position again is the only item under appeal is the classification. There's no way to change the classification without meeting the test, and the liability to taxation has not been appealed. So our position is that the board here today maintain the classification of this property as 60 other based on the fact that the liability status is taxable and not anything other than taxable.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for the assessor?
Just a couple. The assessor was aware that it appealed the school tax liability issue to the Court of Claims bench.
Correct.
The assessor received our brief setting out that was school tax liability was the issue.
I reviewed the brief and I noticed that there was a significant amount of information in the brief with respect to the liability issue. I then received notice from another area coordinator that yourself had been trying to get a hold of me. And when I did speak with you regarding the property, I informed you at the time that the liability had not been appealed and that I did get the brief and there was a substantial amount of information with respect to the liability. And I informed yourself at that time that unfortunately, because the owner did not appeal the liability and only the classification was appealed, that couldn't be looked at. And in our conversation, it was discovered that an error had been made and the owner didn't actually check off the correct boxes that they were supposed to check off, which then led to a number of emails that I received subsequently, which you had referred to earlier in this hearing, with new applications to the Board of Revision, checking off those boxes, attempting to then appeal them.
Okay. So what she's referring to is in my rebuttal. She just referred to the documents and these, given she's referred to them, they should be filed. She can't refer to them, not let them be in front.
Okay.
They were correspondence and emails. A number of them were correspondence and emails between ourselves. He can hand out the correspondence and emails if he wishes. There is a number of information in there that was not our correspondence. I can go through and cite every one of those pages that was actually exchanged to me in the email exchange. Although I think it's sort of besides the point, because the matters under appeal today are classification of the property.
Submitted, she can't refer to that.
I agree.
To the emails without, so you'll see that part of the package. She has the package.
Well, I don't have the package.
Oh,
I have
okay.
a couple of the emails. This email I received, this I received, this I received, this I received, this I received. None of this,
So
none of this portion was sent to me, only the emails.
the emails are not the sections of the statute which she quoted.
Is the remainder just a section of the act?
Yeah.
Or do you have an objection to
No,
this?
he can hand them out if he wants to.
Okay, so then that's fine then. Okay,
Okay.
so. No, it's been introduced, that's fine. Okay, good.
In your last answer, you had indicated that you referred to the word error. That's your word, it's not a word that was found in any of the emails that we drafted, correct?
This was from our conversation that we had on the phone.
The conversation was that our view was that classification included the school tax exemption, and that was confirmed in an email to you December 20th, that same day, later in the day, correct?
Our conversation does not follow the way the emails are written. The conversation that we had, based on, again, this is my interpretation of our conversation, that the applicant was very surprised and taken aback by my informing them that only classification was appealed and not liability. And the comment that I recall and wrote down was, so the owner made an error when filling out the application. That was the conversation we had, and then when I continued to say in the conversation, because classification was the only thing appealed, and the only way to change the classification to an institutional classification, you must have also appealed the liability, because you need to be school tax exempt, which was not appealed. So unfortunately, the board cannot make a decision to change, to make it 40T, because that does not exist in the legislation. And I then was told that that was my interpretation, and the applicant appreciated that that was the stance the city was going to take. And then there was some commentary on case law of the forms just being administrative things. And then when I came to work the next day, I got these very lengthy emails that have now been exchanged, where it looks as though the applicant, in my opinion, was attempting to fill out the application properly to open up a point of appeal that had not been appealed at the time that the application was made originally.
A couple more questions and that completes it. And now, in your brief filed, your brief was filed and prepared before seeing our brief, is that it? Before seeing our brief, or was your brief, was it prepared before seeing our brief?
Correct. My brief was prepared prior to the exchange,
Yes.
as was
Okay.
yours.
And at page 9 of your brief,
Yep.
you quoted and included section 23C, correct? Correct?
Mm-hmm.
You have to indicate yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
And when you prepared this brief, you had seen the form with the box classification ticked off, correct?
Correct.
even with the box classification ticked off, you knew you had to include section 23 at page 9, correct?
I included that and knew to include that because classification was under appeal, which I knew because I got the application and saw that the box was checked off. Even though the classification onus is not on our department, I knew that the only argument and my understanding of the legislation is this is not residential, this is not railway, this is not farm. The only other option is institutional. And I knew that there was no way that this board could change the classification from 60 other to 40 because the liability was not appealed. Because I included it because to be able to change the classification from 60 to 40, you must meet that standard of section 23(1)(c), or to be school tax exempt, to show that if you look at the front of the brief where it says liability status, it is taxable. So I included that to show it does not meet the standard of 23(1)(c) because it is not school tax exempt, it is taxable.
And at page 15 of your brief, I guess we should mark it. Referring to it, is it marked?
It's been submitted.
Okay. You copied and put the test under institutional property 8B, which we've read into the record a couple times, correct?
Yes, I included the whole regulations section of classification of properties, so that when we were discussing the classification of the property, we could go through to the board to go through and say, this is not residential, this is not railway, this is not institutional because it is not school tax exempt. The only other option, because it is not classified and doesn't meet the test of sections 1 through 8, it can only be other property 10 because it does not meet the other. That is why it was included.
And the position of the assessor both before this board and the courts is that dairy farmers is not entitled to a school tax exemption. That's the reason you're giving, correct?
No,
the position before this board and before the Court of Queen's Bench is that dairy farmers is not entitled to a school tax exemption.
I can't speak to the hearing that's before the Court of Queen's Bench as I'm not involved in it and it has not been heard and I have not reviewed anything with respect to it, so I cannot speak to anything that relates to that. We have our legal who is responsible for that particular appeal. I included it because the liability, as previously stated on the front of my brief, is currently taxable. Therefore, it does not meet a classification of 8B. And the only option is to classify this property as 60 other.
Maybe we can narrow it down a little bit more than you're not challenging the statement in my brief that your legal department started a court action to try and overturn the decision of this Board of Revision at tab D, correct?
I have to stick to the facts that are under appeal today, and it is the 2020 assessed value of this particular property under appeal today for 2020 based on the application that I submitted in my brief on page 30 for the 2020 appeal at the Board of Revision.
Yes.
I am not here to discuss any outstanding Court of Queen's Bench appeals for previous assessment years. That is not why I'm here today, so I would like the matters to be kept to this, please.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davidson?
I have no questions.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Nor do I. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Sure. We're just going to take a quick recess. All right, I will call this meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket will be 865 Henderson Highway.
Can you state your full name, please?
Warren Russell Baldwin.
Do you swear that the evidence you provide with this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just went to the wrong Henderson Highway. All right, Ms. Boardroom, please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're looking at file number 19-4911, roll number 02-021-161000. The address is 865 Henderson Highway. This is a 3-story office building built in 2019. It has a land area of 21,534 square feet and a leasable area of 22,672 square feet. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $3,920,000. If you look on my page 2 of my brief, you'll see an aerial photo of the subject property showing its location on the east side of Henderson Highway between Linden Avenue and Green Avenue. If you look on page 3, you'll see subject property photos. These are old photos. The building has been completed. On page 5 of my brief, you'll see the income valuation for the subject property. If you look, we have the 3 stories are separated into the 3 areas. We have the first floor of 7,080 square feet, the second floor of 7,432 square feet, and the third floor of 8,160 square feet. We've applied a blended rate of $15.07 to all of the space. We have a total potential rent of $341,657. We've applied our modeled vacancy of 5.5%. We've applied our modeled expenses of 2%, our modeled shortfall of $7 a square foot, and an overall capitalization rate, which is from our model, of 6.55%. You'll note that there is a $777,421 other adjustment. The third floor is actually unfinished. The only portions of the building that are completely finished are the first and second floors, those 2 7,000 square feet. So the third floor is shell space. And they're in the process of completing it. They've only completed the bathrooms at the time of the inspection of March of 2019. So that other adjustment is at $95 a square foot roughly, and that's fit-up costs to fit up the shell space for tenants to occupy. A typical fit-up cost that our department applies is $60 to $100 a square foot. And that information that we apply is based on Marshall and Swift cost manuals, and that's how we derive those numbers. So we typically use anywhere between $60 to $100 a square foot per tenant fit up, and we've applied in this situation $95.27 a square foot to finish that third floor space. On page 6, you'll see comparables. I've included 2 sets of comparables. The top set are newer builds. So you'll note that these are in different areas of the city because it is harder to find rental rates for newer built properties that are not owner occupied. You'll see that we have an average of $18.92 and a median of $18.76. And again, we applied a blended rate of $15.07 to this space. The second chart you'll note, these are Henderson Highway comparables, so comparables that are all located on Henderson Highway, similar to the subject. They have an average of $13.54 and a median of 14. You will note that the actual year built of all of these properties, the newest ones are 1980, which is significantly older than the subject property being built in 2019. On page 8, you'll see cap rate information. We have a bunch of information with respect to different companies for Colliers, CBRE, Cushman Wakefield. This is a suburban office building, and you'll note that we have cap rates that range for the city of Winnipeg. Our lows range from 5.55% to 9.05% for suburban A's and B's. And then our 20th and 80th percentile is 6.2 to 7.3. Again, this is a newer build, which has less risk than a typical property that is a little bit older, that might have more capital costs involved. So we've applied a capitalization rate of 6.55% for the subject property. On page 10, you'll see subject property photos. These are from the inspection, as I spoke to, from when our staff inspected it in March of 2019. Again, on page 11, you'll see photos of the subject property. They have boardroom space, lunchroom space, office space. It's typical, in my opinion, higher quality office finish. On page 14, I've included the subject property floor plans. So you'll see them on 15, showing the main floor, the second floor, and the third floor. So you'll note that the main and second floor are demised space because they have been fit up for tenants, and the third floor, you'll note that it is just one open space because it only has the bathrooms as previously stated. You'll see larger photos of these on pages 16 is the main floor plan, showing how the space is demised. On page 17 is the second floor plan, showing the space. And on page 18 is the third floor plan, showing that, again, it is shell space. On page 19, this is the declared permit value to date with respect to the new construction. According to the permits, they have spent $6,600,000 to build this project up to date. And then from pages 20 through 28 are all the permit details that were summarized in the chart on page 19. The last pages of our brief is the addenda that we include. We indicate that this is a 2020 reassessment with a fresh look where we analyze information from market information from April 1st, 2018, looking at income information from 2017. On page 32, we've included a number of cap rate information. Office cap rates, these are actual sales of arm's length transactions for properties that have sold, that we have income information on, that a stabilized net operating income was done to come up with the cap rate. And for the office properties, they range from 5.1% upwards of 6.54. And again, our modeled cap rate is 6.55. On page 33, we've included a non-recoverable expense sampling. Our nets this cycle with respect to 2020, when we were reviewing information from 2017 income mailers, management expense at 5% that we had typically used in our reassessments, we had noted that management was typically a recovered expense. So our rents, that blended rent of $15.07 that I spoke of before, those are already net of management. So we do not then take another 5% off for management because our rents are already net of management. So for non-recoverable expenses, we have the vacancy, we have the shortfall, and we also have the 2% expense that we give from our model. So back to page 33, this is our non-recoverable expense sampling where a number of properties were reviewed, and it's noted that the total median of these properties for the non-recoverable expenses, net of vacancy and shortfall, and the median of 1.06, and we are using 2% in our model. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions for the assessor?
Thank you. Ms. Warren, so you didn't physically inspect this property?
I did not.
You did not, okay. You want to make any corrections to page 1 of your report?
This is the information that we have in our system, and I don't have any corrections that I have to make at this time, no.
So you're standing by the fact that this is a reinforced concrete frame building rather than steel frame?
That's the information that's in our system.
Okay, well, I'm advising you now that it's steel frame. What about your gross floor area? The difference between your gross floor area and leasable area is how many square feet?
I haven't done the math at the difference between leasable and gross.
Well, we've got time. Do you want to do it, please?
7,080 square feet.
Okay, and you go to page 1, the plan area
Okay,
is what?
7,080 square feet.
Okay, so it divides 29,752 by 7080, and what do you get for number of floors? Roughly.
4.2.
Yeah, and you said this building is how many stories?
According to the information in our records, it is a 3-story building.
So there's an error in the gross floor area, correct?
I can't speak to any errors in the gross floor area. That is the information that we have in our records.
Well, you just did the calculation. There's one floor missing then, and you're total of 29,752. If the plan area is 7080, where's the other floor?
Again, I can't speak to where the gross floor area comes from in the leasable area. All I have are the information that's in my brief. I did not put this property on the roll. This is the information that is in our system.
Okay, and you only, on pages 16 to 18, you only show 3 floor plans, correct?
Correct. And again,
So there's no 4th floor.
we're not assessing for a 4th floor. We're assessing for 7,000 square feet of leasable area. If you refer back to my page 5, we have 7,080 square feet on the 1st floor, 7,432 square feet on the 2nd, and 8,160 square feet on the 3rd. That is the information that we have in our system, and that's how we're assessing this particular property, for a total leasable area of 22,672 square feet.
On the 3rd floor, you show an area 8160 square feet. Is that based on a single tenant occupying the full floor?
I believe that's based on the full floor because it's shell space, and until a tenant occupies the space, it stays as such.
So you made the statement about the 3rd floor that they're working on the 3rd floor or something to that effect, or?
Based on the note that I have, the main and 2nd floor are complete and owner occupied as of the March 2019 inspection. The 3rd floor only had completed bathrooms, and they're in the process of completing the 3rd. So we applied.
You say they're in the process of completing the 3rd floor?
That was the note from the person who did the inspection.
Where did you get that information from?
From their inspection on March 2019.
Well, at the moment, there is no intention to finish the 3rd floor off. I mean, they put the washrooms in there. as part
Mr.
of-
Baldwin, perhaps when it's your turn to give evidence, you can go into
Okay.
all of that. Just ask for questions at this time.
Page 5, your tenant allowance for finishing the 3rd floor, you said it was based on Marshall Swift.
Yes.
Do you have your specifications for the finishing for the 3rd floor?
Can you clarify that question?
Well, you give a number of $95 a square foot. What does it include?
Those are typical, if you look at Marshall and Swift and you look at the cost manuals for shell space and finished office space, on a per square foot basis for tenant fit up, it's somewhere between $60 to $100 a square foot. And when you're looking at more sort of Class A office space, you would be looking at more of $100 to $120. And this is a property on Henderson Highway, and we've applied a $95 per square foot.
Is that based on a single tenant occupancy or a multi-tenant occupancy?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question, Mr. Baldwin.
On page 5, you have no management fee. Any reason for not having a management fee included as an expense?
I believe I explained that in my presentation, Mr. Baldwin.
Where did you explain that in your presentation?
Our rents are net of management already for the 2020
Where is
reassessment.
that stated though?
I stated it in my presentation, Mr. Baldwin.
You referred to the comment on page 7 where you talk about potential rental and aspects on it?
I again stated that in my presentation that our rent is net of management already, and that is how our assessment is done for the 2020 reassessment, that all of our rents are already net of management because that is typically something that is a recovered expense. So we do not then again apply it for a second time because it's already been applied.
So you're telling me now that asking rents include a management fee. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying, Mr. Baldwin.
Well, you're saying on page 7, estimated potential rent, including the cost of management.
I'm saying that our modeled net rents from our model are net of management already.
So you're saying that the figure on page 7, the gross effective income, where is your net income on that workup?
Like my net operating income, where it
Well, you're
says
saying
net
that the
operating
cost of
income?
management is part of the net income. So what number on page 7 is your net income?
I'm a little bit confused by your question. On page 7, there's a bolded line that says net operating income of $307,680.
So the management fee is buried somewhere above that number. That's what you're telling me?
I'm saying that the management fee has already been netted from our potential rent.
I see. And what management fee were you using in the potential rent?
Again, when we review the income and expense mailers, management is typically an expense that is recovered. So the tenants, when they're reporting on the mailers, they report the rents that they get and they report the management expense that they have. And typically management is 100% recovered from, which is what we have found on the mailers. Therefore, the rents that we are applying are net of management. And it would be double counting to then apply another 5% management on top of that.
Okay, if the building is owner occupied, would not there be even a management fee included?
Pardon me?
If the building is owner occupied, is there not a management fee that someone is going to be paid to manage the building, like in the subject property that's owner occupied?
Again, our modeled net rents include a management fee. Whether they're owner occupied or not, we apply the model rents to owner occupied properties as well as tenant occupied properties because these are market rents from our model, which are already net of management, indicating that whether the building is owner occupied or not, we are applying a management fee to it from our net rents.
Yeah. This is the first time that the department has not included a particular number for management, correct?
Again, I spoke to that in my presentation, and if you refer to
No,
our page...
you're not answering my question. I said, on page 7, you have not given a management fee, and this is the first time you've never shown a separate management fee to date, correct, since about 1990 or something?
And I explained that every 2 years when we do a reassessment, we look at the information that is brought to us, and we are required and mandated by the legislation to take a fresh look every reassessment at the data that we have, and then do our model and apply market values appropriately based on the data that we have. And I can read this for you, Mr. Baldwin. It says 2020, a fresh look.
Yeah,
For the 2020 general assessment, the Assessment Taxation Department has altered the approach to non-recoverable expense allowance for commercial and industrial properties from what has been done in previous assessment cycles. Under provincial legislation, all properties in Manitoba are assessed every 2 years to ensure assessments keep pace with changing market conditions. This is confirmed in the Court of Appeal decision in Broadway Square Limited versus the assessor for the City of Winnipeg, which states, the valuation of real property in Manitoba for municipal purposes is quite complex. It is governed by the Municipal Assessment Act, SM 1989-90, CCSM CM 226. The statutory scheme requires that a fresh assessment for all properties be carried out every 4th year. At the time, the frequency of general reassessments was every 4 years, opposed to the current 2-year cycle, but the statutory scheme still requires a fresh assessment when conducting a general assessment. Regardless of the approach ATD has used to derive market value assessments in the past, with each general reassessment, the department reviews market data and employs appropriate methods to fulfill the mandate of estimating value.
In the Municipal Assessment Act, there's a definition of value changed since 2016 reference date?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So in the definition of value, which is in, you're probably aware of it, it has to be a willing seller and a willing buyer. Are you aware that in the Manitoba Real Estate Association encyclopedia, the Manitoba Real Estate Association has to follow guidelines set up by the Securities Commission on the Real Estate Brokers Act, that you're supposed to show, if the management isn't showing the management fee, you have to show the management fee as a separate item?
I'm not aware of that, Mr. Baldwin.
Then most people that would be selling commercial building this size could be a commercial real estate agent, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Mr. Baldwin.
So if someone is selling this building and they're a commercial real estate agent, they have to show a management fee whether there's one stated or not. It has to be shown separately.
I can't speak to what a commercial real estate agent has to do. I'm not a commercial real estate agent.
Your definition of value in the Municipal Assessment Act hasn't changed. Neither is the marketplace. You have to show and have to have a management fee included. In the subject property, what would a property manager be involved in? What would be his duties?
I'm not sure, Mr. Baldwin. I don't have an answer to that question.
What do you think his duties would be in managing this building?
I answered that question already, Mr. Baldwin. I'm not sure. I wouldn't be able to speak to it. I'm not a property manager, so I can't speak to what his duties are.
So you have no idea what the job description of a property manager might be?
I'm not a property manager, so I can't speak to that, Mr. Baldwin.
So you think someone is going to do 20, 21 tasks in this building for nothing?
I didn't say it was for nothing. Again, the City of Winnipeg model, and I will repeat this, I think, for the last time, Mr. Baldwin.
Where did that direction to change that come from? The assessment department or outside the assessment department?
Madam Chairman, I think I've answered this question to the best of my ability, and I'm not sure I can answer it any differently.
I have a serious problem with them not showing a proper management fee. Because we're required by law to show a management fee. And no one's going to own this building and do all the tasks they have to do, including getting a call at 11 o'clock at night to come down and check the doors because the doors are open. I mean, when I own my building, I got a call out of bed, my building's on fire. So I run downtown, fire trucks in front of my building, there's no fire. I still have to get out of bed and come downtown. If someone told me I had a fire, that was my management responsibility because I managed the building. There's all kinds of tasks, and the fact that you don't show a management fee is very disturbing to me as a real estate broker and a former property owner, because you're going to create the management fee in this building, but it's equivalent to about a $200,000 value, and it's not being taken and not being considered. That's not correct.
We understand your position and the city's position.
No, it's the position of the marketplace.
No, we understand, and we've heard arguments on both sides numerous times.
No, I've got at least, 20 items that the property manager is responsible for. That's a lot of work to do. Someone has to do it, and there's no way that that's reflected in the potential rent.
We understand that, but again, it's not the city assessors.
It's not the city assessors.
The city assessor is not a property manager, so she's answering questions about her brief and the information included in her brief, not about what a property manager would do. So perhaps you can ask her some questions about her brief if you have any more.
Is there an open air balcony on the second floor of this property?
To my knowledge, there is an open air balcony.
Pardon me?
To my knowledge, yes, there is an open air balcony. I believe it's shown on my page 11 in the bottom right-hand corner.
On page 21, what's the gross building area shown on that building permit application, please?
It just says to construct a new 3-story, 22,600 square foot building.
Right. So you're disagreeing with that number?
Again, Mr. Baldwin, and I will point you to page 5 of my brief. Our assessed value on page 5 of $3,920,000 is based on the leasable area of 22,672. I cannot speak to what the gross floor area is. That's what's in our records, and if that is a mistake, I can look into it after. But right now, what I do know is our assessed value is based on 22,672 square feet, and not a gross floor area of 29,752.
I would like you to check that so that the owner doesn't have to keep dealing with that down the road since this is a brand new building. I mean, there's an error. The figure 29 is not correct. The architects...
Perhaps if you have other information, you can provide that to us during your presentation.
Your comparables, Ms. Warren, on the top of page 32. All those properties are, some of them are downtown, correct? Some of them are, 2 of them are historical, is that correct?
I can't speak to what these properties are. I have not looked into them.
Okay. Do you know what's at 739 Henderson Highway?
I do not know.
If I told you it was the back of Carlos, you wouldn't dispute that then?
I, again, have stated that I don't know what these properties are. This is evidence that we put in all of our briefs. I do know that all of these sales have been reviewed and are arm's length transactions.
Reviewed by yourself, or?
As I stated, this is reviewed by people in our department and put together as an addenda for all of our briefs that are shown in every single brief that is submitted to the Board of Revision for the 2020 cycle. And all I can state on them is that they are arm's length transactions. They have been reviewed of actual sales with income and expense data that has been stabilized to come up with the net operating income.
So you don't take any responsibility for it, you just feed it into the report?
Again, that is what
I think
we
Ms.
put in
Wareham
all
has
of our-
already answered
Okay.
that question.
On page number 6, what is your average, what's the difference between the average rate in comparables 1 to 8 compared to the 1 to 14? What's the difference in the average price per square foot?
As stated in my presentation, I've included 2 sets of comparables. Comparables of newer built properties and then comparables of properties on Henderson Highway. This is a newer built property, which as stated in my presentation previously, these comparables are from all over because newer built properties that typically aren't owner occupied or rarely rented, and are owner occupied. So these are our comparables that we have for newer builds. And this is to show what rental rates are for newer builds. And then the difference of the bottom one are what rental rates and market value typically are found on Henderson Highway, saying that the average and the median is about $13.54 and $14. Again, of properties that are significantly older than the subject, therefore inferior to the subject property. So if newer builds are somewhere around the $18 to $19 range from what we're seeing in the market, and properties on Henderson Highway are in the $14 range of significantly older properties, the only logic would state that all of the comparables on Henderson, if the subject property was compared to it, it would be superior because it's a significantly newer building, which would therefore earn a higher rent in the market because the comparables that I've shown on the top of my page, newer builds do earn higher rents from the market and demand higher rents because they are newer builds.
Okay. Now, can I get an answer for my question? Which is, what's the difference in rate per square foot? That was my question.
Madam Chairman, I think I explained that. I'm not sure what
I
answer.
just want to know what the rate per square foot difference is. That was my question.
Are you asking for a mathematical
Yes, I'm
calculation?
asking. What's the difference
I
between
believe the
18
numbers are in front of you
Are they?
on page 8.
on page 6? I'm just asking for what the difference is between 1892 and 1354.
If you're asking me to take $18 minus $14, it's $4. If that's what your question is, that's how math works.
That's a fairly significant number, correct?
I believe I've explained why there's that difference.
Yeah.
And Madam Chairman, again, I think I've explained all of this as clearly as I can and in as much detail as I can.
No, well, the way you set it up is very interesting. It explains why you get more money for a property in the south side of the city than you do along Henderson Highway. There's been very little development along Henderson Highway in the last 20, 30 years. This is a bit of a stagnant area. It's only been the last 5 years you have some
Okay, wait,
significant new
it's
construction.
asking questions now, not giving evidence, so if you have any more questions, please ask them, and then you can give evidence when it's your turn to give evidence.
do you think it's going to take them to lease the third floor from the subject building?
I haven't done a leasing analysis, Mr. Baldwin, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
So you have no...
I believe she answered that, she doesn't know.
And determining your vacancy rate is, what's it based on?
Our modeled vacancy is our modeled vacancy.
Okay,
It's based on typical market vacancies.
Roughly 1/3 of the building is empty, right?
Currently, 1/3 of the building is vacant because it was just built. And it does take time to bring tenants in and do tenant fit up. And when we're looking at market value, you have to look at what market vacancy is.
But in a new building, in maybe a depressed area, your vacancy rate might take that into consideration?
I can't speak to if it's a depressed area. I'm not sure I agree with that, Mr. Baldwin. I don't know why an owner would build a brand new building in a depressed area.
I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davidson?
I just have an informational question. Your income valuation workup is all based on the model, correct?
Correct.
And just to clarify for myself, does the model sort of stratify, say, all the numbers are coming from the suburban office, or is it all offices across Winnipeg?
I can't speak to how the model works with respect, are you asking with respect to capitalization rates or
Yeah,
rental
just-
rates or just sort of in general?
Sort of cap rates and in general, and vacancy rates.
We take a number of things into consideration when we look at all of that. We look at the square footage of the building and size of the building, the different locations, the different areas of the city. So you'll note that there will be different capitalization rates with respect to age and size. Those are some key factors in different capitalization rates for suburban office buildings. And also location is one of them. So we would be looking at sales of office properties, rental rates of office properties around the city. I can't speak to how the model works, but I do know that those are some of the things that go into it.
So it's fair to say that the intent of your model is to get as close to reality for these particular
Correct.
properties. Okay, and just one other quick question. We know the third floor is not built out yet.
Yes.
So do we know what the rental is on the other two floors at this point?
Because it's owner occupied, it's not, we don't have rental rates on it, which is why we've presented market rental rates for what typically would be happening in the market. Also because it was occupied in 2019, anything that, or it was built in 2019, and we're looking at a reference date of
Right.
April 1st, 2018, the building didn't actually exist at that point.
Okay.
So we can't really look at what's happening in the current building just because it would be post-reference construction.
And the sale history, is that land only?
I believe so, yes, because it's
That
all
would make
prior to
sense.
the sale of the property, or the building of the property.
Okay, thank you very much, that's all.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
I have, if you turn to page 10, the top right-hand corner picture, it appears that this building has its own parking lot.
Correct.
Now, if you turn to your comparisons, rent comparisons,
Okay.
page 6, are you aware of the fact that a significant amount of buildings on Henderson have on-street parking?
I'm not aware of any of my comparables, which ones have street parking and which ones don't have parking. I have not looked into whether or not they have parking.
Would that attribute to a lower rent?
I can't speak to why the rents would be lower on Henderson. I was looking at the rents being lower because of the ages of the property, and because I didn't look at which one of these have on-site parking versus street parking, I would say just based on understanding the market, if someone owns a building that has on-site parking, that is a benefit, which does make it superior to a building that does not have that.
Okay, thank you.
And I have no questions this time, so please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, in response to Mr. McIntyre's question, I believe you're required to have a certain number of parking stalls to get a building permit for a commercial office building.
Do you have that evidence?
No, but...
Do you have the bylaw, or?
No, but that's my understanding of the building code. There's a requirement for a number of parking stalls based on the use.
No, that's fine, that's your testimony.
Okay. This particular building, I was involved with these people before they even bought the property, we were trying to acquire an adjoining piece of property on 4th Street that was vacant. We were going to do we were thinking of maybe doing a joint venture with Royal Canadian Securities, which is part of Everett's group. They have a 50-foot lot on 4th Street adjoining their old building on 4th Street. And that didn't go through, so then they purchased this property on Henderson Highway. As most of the principals in this company live up that end of town, that's why they chose that end of town. So I've been involved with this property from day one. There's some parking restrictions in front of the subject property depending on which direction you're going. In the evening there's a 3:30, 5:30 restriction on the east side, and then in the morning there's a restriction in the morning for cars going downtown. This particular site is a block-to-block holding. Soon after they bought it, they had to deal with massive environment because it used to be a former certification site, so they have to deal with possible contamination, but that proved to be not the issue because the site was cleaned up by Imperial before they sold it. The subject property is owned by a numbered company. There's an error on page 3. The plan number is 1216, so that legal description has changed too. It's now a lock and block. But the old legal description when they bought it was lots 1 to 8, block 2, plan 1216. It's a 3-story building. Ford Group of Chartered Accountants own the rent the main and second floor. They lease it back from the numbered company. Ford Group they paid for the improvements for their space. Trying to find a number in here. Yeah, if you go to page 11, it's in the second paragraph from the bottom. To finish the main, that's page 11, the second paragraph from the bottom. The cost to finish the main floor and the second floor was $945,000 or $66.41 a square foot. The main and second floor, especially the main floor, has a lot of built-ins. It's fairly elaborate, so I don't expect that the tenant improvements for the third floor are going to be at the end or the high end or the number that the city assessment is projecting. This building is probably one of the highest insulated buildings I've come across. The roof deck is an R50 and the walls are an R39 or 40, which is very, very high. It's the highest I've ever seen. It's a steel frame building. There's 15 rooftop units, 1 elevator, and it's all divided into offices, and there's a business center on the main floor, and Ford Group occupies the total second floor. Over on page 6, I don't know whether the city uses the Bowman method for determining usable area, but the net rentable area in the main floor is 6969 because the open vestibule area has been taken out. The second floor, the balcony isn't heated, so that area is taken out, so the rentable area in the second floor is 7273. And because the third floor is probably going to be rented out on a multi-tenant basis rather than a full floor occupancy, I've estimated a U-shaped corridor around the washrooms, the elevator, and the stairway, so the net rentable area for the third floor is going to be around 6,089 square feet. And this is probably the way the third floor is going to be developed. The third floor is probably not going to be fully occupied until after October of 2021. So the third floor is going to be vacant partially until then, and at the moment they have no prospects for the third floor. There was a commercial agent involved. They had no prospects. Nobody came forward with any offers for renting the third floor. Based on what the city came up with, the rental values along Henderson Highway, And then when you look at Henderson Highway, which I'm very familiar with, because I've been going down that street for 25 years, there's been very little commercial activity along Henderson. And there's very little in the way of commercial sites. The last 3 sites, which I'll address in my report, have been acquired recently. And there's another building that's, I'm surprised the city didn't use it, it's 755 Henderson Highway. We approached the owner of that building, that would be Reuben Lester, to buy his building instead of building the one on page 65. And Reuben, when we talked to him when he was away, he didn't want to sell it, but that building had a vacancy in it, which will address it. We figured that rather than build one, we could maybe buy his building, but he wasn't interested in selling. So anyway, that's the 3rd floor is going to be vacant for a number of years to come. The estimated net rentable area that I've calculated using GOMA and based on my knowledge of the building is $20,331. Based on about the present vacancy rate is 29.9%. The subject permit building area is 22,600. The assessment department area is 22,672. There's 37 parking stalls for the subject property. Basement percentage of net rentable area of 2331 over the heated floor area. That's 91.3%. The heated floor area is not necessarily a rentable area. On page 7, comparable number 1 is 755 Henderson Highway, which the city assessor has made no mention of. This building has been available since April 15. It's got a considerable amount of vacancy still today. The vacant space in there is 36.6%. As of April 1st, 18, the vacancy in that building is 45%. And I bet the city is only giving them 5% or a very nominal rate. They're not reflecting the actual vacancy. In the brochure for this building, the rental rate, the additional rent, which would be the common area and taxes, was $645 a square foot. Plus, there was a stated 5% management fee of the gross rent. The building at 755 Henderson Highway is considered somewhat superior to the subject, but has a low percentage of leasable area at 74.6% compared to its gross building area. This building has 2 full sets of stairs. The subject estimated rate by comparison is 91.3% because the main floor and the second floor of my building are owner occupied, so they occupy the whole floor. So you can use the interior wall measurements to determine the rentable area. So there's no hallways, so to speak. The hallway becomes rentable area. It's not lost because it's a full floor occupancy. The parking ratio of 755 Henderson is 1 stall for every 753 square feet. The subject is 609. Part of the problem with 755 Henderson is not enough parking. Because Mr. Fletcher has some of his office people in there and they're taking up too much of the parking. So the owner bought the church behind it for a little over $1 million, tore the church down, and is going to eventually maybe put some parking behind it, which is one of the reasons why this building has had a problem with finding tenants. At Henderson Highway, based on what Ms. Warren came up with, you can see that the disparity between the rents along Henderson and the rents in the southern part of the city. Some of the tenants that used to be on Henderson Highway, when I was looking around some of our comparables, I could find them. They've moved to the south side of the city. On page 8, 441 Henderson Highway. It's a former medical tenant. The lawyer that's in the other side was a client of mine. That building just leased after being available for 6 years to another medical tenant. But that property was leased and advertised through Colliers for 6 years before they found a tenant. And they were asking $14 a square foot. I don't believe the assessment was ever appealed, but I can't believe someone hung on to that thing for that length of time. because after the doctors moved out, the person bought the building and then tried to rent it to another medical group, but the tenants just moved in September of this year. This is an older building with parking in the front and parking at the back. But with that one, because your front door is your entrance to your space, there's very little wasted space. There's no common area. The whole space is pretty well rentable. There's very little wasted space in this building because of the way it's laid out. It's like 755, as I said. There's a lot of wasted space in that building compared to subject property and based on how it's laid out. Over on page 9, this gives you an idea of the situation of this particular building. On the main floor, there's 2,885 square feet vacant. On the second floor, there's 2,386 square feet vacant. And on the third floor, there's 5,750 square feet vacant. The total vacancy on that building is 36.6%, and that's been available for 4 years. That's how long it's taken to get to that particular point. There's one elevator. I've been in the building for other reasons. I measured the building myself to help me determine the square footage. I looked at it. He did a very nice job. It's superior to 865. Ruben is in the construction business, apartment blocks, industrial space. So he really, he spent a lot of money, did a very good job, but he's got an ongoing vacancy problem. And I think part of it is location, and I said part of it is due to the parking problem he's got. For 755 Henderson Highway, at the 441 Henderson Highway, I've been in discussions with both of those brokers, because I'm also a real estate broker. On page 10, the medical portion of that space represented 66.8% of the space. So 66.8% of the space has been vacant since September 15th, so it took 4 years to rent it out. That's why I have a problem with the city's vacancy rate they're using in the subject. The subject property has a tenant that's going to move in possibly in October of 2021 because they have an existing lease and they can't get out of the existing lease. But that floor is going to be a multi-tenant floor. It's not going to be rented out on a full floor basis. They've had no inquiries for just about the last year. Capital Real Estate was trying to find a tenant and they couldn't find one. I talked to Rene Zagalski, and that's what he told me, that just couldn't get any interest. So when you look at the difference you can get for your building in South Winnipeg or along Henderson Highway, where would you want to put up a building? I'd probably want to put up a building on the south side of the city rather than the north side because you can get a better return on your investment. It's quite obvious. And by the lack of development along Henderson Highway, there's some social issues at the south end of Henderson Highway. Talking to some other people that have problems with vandalism, graffiti and all that, and it's, I've had discussions with the RCMP about what goes on that side of Henderson Highway, but it's an issue. On page 11 of my report, I'm using a 28.7% vacancy rate, which reflects the present vacancy rate. I'm using the 5% management fee. Being a real estate broker and having done some research, I'm required, according to the Real Estate Brokers Act and the Manitoba Real Estate Association, that an owner or occupant doesn't show the management fee, it has to be shown and it has to be...
No, we understand. We understand.
Well, I was surprised that I didn't realize it was actually stated in the book. It says management, it says here, a charge must be inserted in the statement if the owner is the manager and doesn't charge the fee. So it's spelled out, and that's part of the Securities Commission. I mean, I wasn't aware of it, but anyway.
I understand your
Now,
position.
in page 11, I mentioned that figure about how much it cost the accountants to finish off their space was $66.41 a square foot. It's not uncommon when you're doing a new building is to put the washrooms in on the third floor, because that's where they're going to be, and it's easier to finish them. You're not going to move them if a tenant moves in. They are, because of the plumbing and the stairs and everything else, they just finish them off because it's not uncommon to have that done. So based on my estimated value of April 1st, 18, I'm saying $2,810,000. And I'm not disputing the cap rate the city is using, but I do dispute their vacancy rate and them not allowing a proper management fee. The redevelopment of McIver Mall on Henderson Highway states a rent, and on top of it, at the very bottom, it says plus a 5% management fee. It's not built into the rent. And on 441 Henderson Highway, it's stated a separate management fee. Management fees are not built into the rent, they're stated separately. And I don't know where this 5% management fee is disallowing where the management fee is coming from, but it's going to have some dire consequences on the property values in this city. It's the wrong direction. So what I've done is also assume the full occupancy in the subject property on page 12. Come up with a value of $3,965,000. And I take the difference between the present situation and the full occupancy. The difference is $1,115,000. The cost of third floor improvements is $441,265 based on $65 a square foot. That's deducted off the difference in the values between the present state and the finished building. So the net increase in market value as a result of the tenant improvements is $673,000. It's part of the shell is there, so it's worth something. You're not going to give away the building without getting some money for the shell. So I've looked at the difference between finished and unfinished and come up with a value of $3,485,000. Because the vendor isn't going to sell it without getting some recapture for the shell that's there, and the purchaser isn't going to pay give full credit for having that shell finished off, because it's going to cost money to finish it. It's going to cost money. You're going to have to get a permit, get contractors. It's going to take you maybe 3 or 4 months. But based on talking to the real estate agents involved in my comparables and my own knowledge of the market, and based on what the person looking after the building told me that they're not going to, one tenant is not going to be in the building until October of 21, and I don't think they're going to find a full floor tenant. This has been a very interesting exercise because I've been close to it all along. The city's when you own a building like this, you've got some pretty bad days some days. When I had my building downtown, I got beat up 3 times. And I guess that's why I ended up selling it. But when you're looking after a building like this, there's no one who's going to do it for nothing. The property manager and this one here, they've got issues all the time. I mean, they have to, these guys are just new and running a building like this. this. I mean, you got 15 rooftop units, you've got, Alex got a call the other night, I talked to him Monday, he got a call 11 o'clock in the morning to go down, and they were on and off because the door was open. So, there's just someone in the building, but you've got parking issues, landscaping, you got to deal with the assessment department, you know, you got to fill out an income questionnaire every day, you got income tax, you got insurance, you got replacement costs, you got to deal with the new space. I mean, no one's going to do that for nothing. And the fact that the city's thing is built into the asking rent, that's going to be a major thorn in the side of people wanting to invest in Winnipeg. It's going to have negative effects. Like I tell people now, you want to invest in Winnipeg, forget it. You won't get a return on your investment. It's not worth the hassle. And you're starting to see that with some of the recent prices. The prices are going down.
Okay, well, I understand. Can we
You know,
keep the
I've been in
discussion
this
to the
business-
property?
Pardon me?
Can we keep, just in the interest of time, because there are other matters on the docket, can we keep the discussion to the
Well,
specific
I'm
property?
speaking with just about 60 years of real estate experience as an appraiser and a real estate broker, and I think this is a much fairer representation of the issues that the subject property faces and what the city's trying to show in their documentation. They're not treating the vacancy properly. I mean, you can see on 755 Henderson Highway, it's a long time to carry space. You still got to pay for the common area expenses.
No, we understand.
Yeah.
We understand your position.
You know, and I hope that someone comes to their senses about this 5% management fee. It's not going to sit well with people. I guess I don't know what else I can tell you. I guess that's my brief.
Thank you very much. Ms. William, do you have questions for the applicant?
I think just one. When you're talking about vacancy, you've used 28.7%. So your market analysis of vacancy is based on the two properties that you've mentioned on your pages 7 at 755 Henderson Highway and page 8 at 441 Henderson Highway. That's how you come up with your market vacancy analysis?
I'm also aware of all the vacant space downtown. And the building they left on 4th Street has been vacant for just about a year.
So 30% is a typical suburban office vacancy based on your analysis?
Well, this is a new building. It takes a while to fill it up. And I was surprised at the vacancy at 755. Again, it allows me to have a really good look at vacancy.
Those are my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davidson?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have some. You mentioned 755 Henderson Highway, and on page 9 of your brief, you're indicating rental rates of between $20 and $25.
That's the asking.
Is that putting them out of the marketplace completely?
I think they're above the market. I mean, the fellows at the subject property have dropped their rate. They were in 20 to 22 range, and they dropped it now to 20. They've given up trying to find a tenant. They're going to try and fill it with their own staff.
But you're at, let's go back to yours. You're at between 16 and 18 on page 11 of your
Right.
work. Now, there seems to be quite a discrepancy between the rental rate on the subject property and 755.
The 755, in the brochure, he's asking, like in the addenda, maybe I should go through the addenda quickly.
I think we're finished with the evidence at this point. So.
Yeah, I think on page 3 of my addenda, I talk about for a rental area, how you calculate it.
Well, and just to clarify this on page, your addenda, page 10 of your addenda, the advertisement from Cushman Wakefield is 20 and 25, which is what?
Yeah, that brochure hasn't changed since it came out 4 years ago.
Okay, 441 Henderson. Is that close to Hesper?
It's maybe half a mile north of Westbrook.
And is it not on the part of Henderson Highway that turns abruptly and heads directly north? In other words, it's on that corner?
No, it's further north. It's just straight, it's fairly straight there.
Okay. You mentioned new construction was, there's a lease-up time. What is that lease-up time?
On the subject property?
On any property? Typically. Since you've been in the business for 60 years.
Well, it depends where your building is located, what kind of building you have. Some of the vacancy rates are very worrisome because of how long they've been empty.
Okay.
But Ruben can hang on to his building because he's fairly well off, but I was surprised at how long it's been since he's been trying to rent it out. I mean, it's going to be 3 years at least before the subject property is fully leased. And it's going to be a multi-tenant on the third floor, not a single tenant.
And you did mention that the investment in this sort of area of Henderson Highway was, I don't know your exact words, but wasn't great.
Well, if you look at the activity over the last 20 years, there hasn't been an awful lot of activity. It's just in the last few years that some of the vacant lots have been acquired.
And are you aware there's another new building being built on Henderson in the same area? Okay.
Yeah.
That's all my questions.
That's a one-story building. Yeah.
Okay, and I have no questions, so thank you very much. Leave it with us.
But you've got to get the city to change that rule 100%, because it's going to cost them dearly. Building owners are not, it doesn't sit well with them.
I think we're going to, oh, I was going to say we'll take a quick.
Did you want to maybe do some initial or, and then take a break? Or I guess it doesn't matter really.
Yeah, maybe let's take a quick break. Sure. And then we'll deal with those and Rocky.
Yeah. Madam Chair, how long of a break are we taking?
5-10 minutes, is that?
Did you need something longer, Lindsay?
No, I just need to be gone by before 4:30 because I have.
Yeah.
Yes. You need to get,
Yeah.
yeah. The next matter on the docket is 2165 Henderson Highway. I believe no one is present for that matter. Has anyone contacted you, Madam Assessor?
I spoke with the owner who was on the application a number of times with regard to the assessed value. She had questions about it, we discussed it, there were some email interactions with respect to the square footage of the space.
Did they advise they were coming?
They did not advise they were coming, they did not submit any evidence, so I don't know. I have called them a couple times recently and they have not returned my phone call.
Okay, so we'll have to adjourn the matter to discuss whether or not we're going to hear. Thank you. Please. We'll call this meeting back to order. We will hear the address 2165 Henderson Highway. Ms. Wareham, could you please proceed when ready?
I'm presenting evidence without an applicant here.
Yes, just reading your brief.
Okay. The file number is 19-145, roll number 04007187-600. The address